Are you looking for a vintage receiver but are frustrated by the high rising prices in the secondhand market? Are you looking for a vintage receiver that both looks and sounds great, but you don't want to have to break the bank for? Well, today I want to tell you all about one of my favorite sleeper vintage receivers, the twin-powered Harman Kardon 430. When it comes to affordable vintage receivers with a sound that far outweighs the price, it's really hard to beat the 430. Let me tell you why next. Now, there are a lot of reasons why I love this receiver, and the design just happens to be one of those. Now, I understand this doesn't have sort of that classic silver face look that a lot of other vintage receivers have, but I just absolutely love the black and green design of this receiver. I'm also a sucker for little added design touches that add a little bit of color. And that's why I also think it's great that they added this little red power button in the bottom left-hand corner. This receiver is something that when people see it in your system, they will ask you about it thanks to its wonderful design. The Harman Kardon 430 was released in 1976 with an original retail price of $325. Now, you don't get a lot of power at that price at just 25 watts per channel, but do not let that number fool you. There is a reason why this receiver sounds really great, even with a low wattage, and I'll explain that more in a little bit. Even though this is only rated at 25 watts per channel, the Harman Kardon 430 still allows you to connect two sets of speakers. Those speakers can range from 4 ohms to 16 ohms depending on how you set up your system. Now, there's two important things to note. The first is this unit does not have a relay protection, so don't push your speakers too hard or you may end up blowing one of the multiple fuses located around this unit. The second thing to note is that if you are going to use two sets of speakers with this unit, both of those speakers have to be rated at 8 ohms in order to prevent any damage to the receiver or your speakers. Let's talk connection options available on the 430. If you have a turntable, you'll be able to use the built-in phono preamp on this receiver. And I'm gonna be honest with you, it sounds amazing. Lately, I've been using an external phono preamp made by Vincent, and it has sort of a darker, more hi-fi sound to it. So I was immediately surprised when I started playing the Divine Fits LP. The sound just jumped right out at me, hit me in the face. It was like, bam. It made me want to get up and start dancing, which I promise you is something no one wants to see. Still have a cassette deck? I love making mixtapes even today, and the 430 gives you the option to connect two recorders, whether that be a cassette deck and a reel-to-reel, two cassette decks, whatever. It also gives you one output to be able to play whatever else you just recorded. Now, last night I was listening to this alternative 80s mixtape that I made, and I recorded this on a really great Max L UD160. And I'll be honest with you, it sounded so great playing through the Harman Kardon, I thought I was listening to a CD. And speaking of CDs, the 430 also comes with an auxiliary input, which means you could connect multiple sources to that as well, whether that be a wireless streamer like the Weem Mini, or like I mentioned before, a CD player. Now, all of those features are awesome, but what really makes this unit stand out from others like Marantz or Pioneer is its twin power design. So just what is twin power? Well, it means it has dual power supplies. That's right, there are two power supplies contained within the unit, one for each individual channel. The 430 brings a lot of extra detail and punch to the music thanks to this twin power design. It just has a lot more meat on its bones versus other receivers like a Marantz or Pioneer that may be rated in the same wattage of 20 to 30 watts per channel. Now, I'll be honest with you, I can barely get the volume knob up past a quarter turn before it is playing too loud for my listening space. I just love this twin power idea, but maybe that's because I'm the father of twins, so anything with twin power is a regular occurrence in our house. Let's talk about how this receiver sounds next. As I mentioned before, the dual power supply design of the 430 really adds a lot of extra clarity and detail to everything I've listened to this week. Now, I've owned a lot of vintage gear, and sometimes the sound can get a little muddy with age, especially if you're using a high-powered receiver in a small listening space. However, that has not been the case for me this week while listening to the 430. I wanted to get an idea of the bass performance with the 430. So I pulled out my CD copy of Medeski, Martin, and Wood's It's a Jungle in Here, released in 1993, as this album is chock full of interesting bass solos. I had the tone control set in the 12 o'clock position and everything sounded fine. But then I pressed the contour button on the front of the unit, and that's when the bass really kicked in and the music started pumping right along. Now, fans of vintage gear will know this contour button on other receivers simply as the loudness button. It's what you engage when you're listening to music at lower levels or in a small listening space. It really just helps round out the sound and just kind of gives you that oomph that you may be missing with it disengaged. Now, with the contour button selected, I left the tone controls in the 12 o'clock position and everything was rocking out just as I hoped on my vintage Klipsch Heresy speakers. Now, I've been listening to this receiver all week, and over the weekend I stopped by my local thrift store and found a huge stack of classic rock CDs that I bought. I either bought your CD collection or your dad's CD collection. It was chock full of the band Allman Brothers, Jimi Hendrix, Grateful Dead, all of that. And included was Neil Young's Harvest Moon from 1992. I forgot how much I really enjoy this album, and one of the main reasons is because the featured background vocalist on a lot of these songs is none other than the brilliant Linda Ronstadt. And hearing Linda and Neil sing together on this CD through the Harman Kardon 430 was an absolute joy. So all that to say, don't be scared by the fact that this receiver only rates at 25 watts per channel. Thanks to the dual power design and the fact that it can handle speakers all the way down to 4 ohms and up to 16 ohms, this little receiver can handle almost anything you can throw at it. So we've talked about features, we've talked about sound. Let's talk about one more thing with this unit. That might be my favorite, and that is price. Listen, I went and added up all of the solds for the 430 on eBay, and you're welcome. I did the math, added everything up, and did an average over probably like 11 to 12 of these sold receivers, and I came out with an average price of $300. Now, some of those units were selling for $150 to $199, which I think is an excellent price. Now, I'm not gonna judge anyone on what they wanna save their money and spend it on, but I know that if you are dying to have a Marantz at this same wattage, which is probably gonna be around a 2220B, is probably around the same watts. I looked those up on eBay, and the cheapest that I could find was $300, with some going as high as $650. And as we all know, it's just getting so hard to find a Marantz for a great price. And I have friends that tell me they're just holding out for a vintage receiver and it has to be a Marantz. My advice would be to not be afraid to venture out a little bit and get a lesser known brand like this Harman Kardon 430. Now, I think a lot of people still know Harman Kardon as a name brand, but this is a unit to me that you could probably stumble on at a garage sale or an estate sale for like 50 or 100 bucks. Because I just think that they may not be aware of how great of a unit it is, and they just know that it's not a Marantz, so they price it cheaper. If you stumble on one of those at that price, I definitely think you should pick it up, even if it's like 200 bucks at a local sale, especially when you're not paying shipping on eBay. Now, what you really want to look out for is if you ever stumble on the bigger brother to the 430, the Harman Kardon 730, and that's only a couple hundred bucks, you definitely want to pick up that unit at that price because you're getting the same design, but with more power at 40 watts per channel. All of this to say that I really love vintage gear. Obviously, it can be a big pain in the butt when you have to get it repaired, but it's often fun to have them in your collection and change things out. That was one of the original ideas I had when I started Forever Analog, which originally started as a blog first, and then I decided to start making review videos here on this YouTube channel. If you haven't had a chance to actually go check out the blog, I'll put a link in the description below and encourage you to do so. I've got articles about a Marantz 2270, Pioneer SX 980. I've got articles about how to replace the lights in your Marantz, and several other things that are just helpful tips and tricks for vintage gear. And I also have my new gear reviews up there as well. Also on that site and in the description below, I'll include a link to my mailing list. I would love for you to consider signing up for my mailing list. I send out emails once a week, usually over the weekend, with just tips and tricks, gear reviews, things that I'm learning, and occasionally I'll have a private link in there where you can buy records directly from me from my collection. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term storage issue that comes along with the vinyl community, but that is me. I just have too many records. I bought way too many, especially during the pandemic, and occasionally I've got to sell some off to kind of make room for new ones coming in. So that private link will be in that email list, and I would love for you to sign up and be able to buy those directly from me if that's something you're interested in. One last note. Last year, I bought a Pioneer SX 980 receiver directly from my local record store. And it immediately had me wondering if I made a wise decision buying it at the price I did. If you're interested in learning more about my journey with the Pioneer SX 980, you can do so by watching this video here.